Hello. The moment the seed sprouted came on an otherwise ordinary evening. I was in the kitchen, poring over the details of a new software update while the scent of roasted chicken wafted from the oven. Chloe sat at the kitchen island, her attention seemingly fixed on her phone. I glanced up just as her screen lit with a notification, a message from someone named Travis. I wasn't close enough to see the content, but I saw the way her entire body tensed, the way she pulled the phone closer to her chest, swiping the message away before I could even think to comment. "Who's Travis?" I asked, my voice as casual as I could manage. She froze, the pause just a fraction too long, before turning toward me with a practiced smile. "Oh, just someone from the foundation," she said, her tone dismissive. "He had a question about next week's event." I nodded, but something about her explanation felt brittle, like a hastily constructed excuse. The air between us thickened with a tension I couldn't quite define, and for the first time, I saw my wife through a different lens. The night progressed as most others did. We ate dinner, exchanged a few words about our days, and retreated to our respective corners of the house. Chloe claimed she had some emails to send and disappeared into her office. I wandered into the living room, laptop in hand, but my mind was far from the work on the screen. Travis. I couldn't shake the name. It felt like a single thread tugging at the edges of a tapestry, threatening to unravel everything. My mind raced. Every glance, every late night, every curt response from Chloe suddenly taking on a new and sinister significance. When I finally heard her footsteps heading to bed, I waited. 15 minutes, maybe 20, before I crept into her office. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, a floral scent that had once comforted me, but now felt cloying. Her phone was gone, but her laptop sat open on the desk. I knew Chloe's passwords. She had never changed them since the early days of our marriage. My hands trembled slightly as I tapped them in, the glow of the screen illuminating the darkness. Emails, calendar entries, nothing out of the ordinary. I was about to close it when I noticed something in her browsing history, a car rental site, reservations for weekend getaways I hadn't heard about. My stomach twisted. I couldn't confirm anything yet, but the foundation of my trust in her had been shaken. As I returned to bed that night, sliding under the covers beside her sleeping form, I resolved to find the truth. If Chloe was hiding something, I would uncover it. And when I did, I would not be passive. The life I had built so carefully, the home, the marriage, the trust, was more fragile than I had ever realized. But I was a builder, and if something had to be torn down, I would do it with my own hands. The night I discovered the first breadcrumb, the name Travis, marked a shift in me. I had always thought of myself as someone who valued logic above emotion, strategy above impulse. Yet, lying awake in the dark beside Chloe, my mind churned with a tempest of emotions I couldn't suppress. Anger, betrayal, confusion. They twisted together, rising like a tide that I could neither control nor ignore. But emotions alone would not serve me. If Chloe was hiding something, I needed proof. The truth wouldn't come from arguments or accusations. It would come from cold, hard evidence, the kind that even she could not deny. The following morning, I rose early, careful not to wake her. Chloe murmured something in her sleep as I slipped from the bed, her voice soft and dreamlike, but I felt no tenderness. Instead, I felt a tightening resolve. I brewed a pot of coffee, sat at the sleek kitchen counter, and opened my laptop. Over the years, I had learned more than a few tricks in the tech world. Running a company that developed security software had its advantages, and I knew my way around encrypted data. Chloe wasn't especially tech-savvy, a fact that now worked in my favor. Her phone had been my first concern, but Chloe kept it guarded. Even in her sleep, she seemed to sense its absence. However, she had neglected one critical detail, the cloud. It took less than 10 minutes to bypass her password and access the backups synced to her devices. Messages, call logs, even location history, they were all there neatly cataloged. My heart hammered as I scrolled through the list of names until I saw his, Travis. The first message was innocuous enough, a simple, "See you soon. Can't wait." But as I delved deeper, the tone shifted. There were pet names, references to shared nights, and then the photos. I paused, staring at the screen. There she was, Chloe, smiling in a sunlit room I didn't recognize, her hand resting on Travis's chest. The intimacy of the image hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a flirtation. It was a full-blown affair, and she had woven it into the fabric of her life without a second thought. A sudden wave of nausea rose in me, but I swallowed it down. I could not afford to lose control. Not yet. By the time Chloe wandered into the kitchen, dressed casually in yoga pants and a loose sweater, I had already closed my laptop and forced my face into a mask of neutrality. "Morning," she said, stifling a yawn. She crossed the room to pour herself a cup of coffee, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. "Morning," I replied, my tone light. "Busy day ahead?" She hesitated just a fraction of a second before nodding. "The usual meetings. You know how it is." I didn't know. Chloe was lying. Again. Later that day, I made a call to an old contact, Raven. We had worked together on a cybersecurity breach years ago, and I knew she was not just skilled but discreet. When Raven picked up, her voice was as calm and professional as ever. "Hunter, it's been a while. It has, I admitted. I need your help." The brief silence on the line told me she understood the weight of my request. "Tell me what's going on." I gave her the basics, leaving out the personal details. I told her I needed a full background check on Travis, his finances, his movements, and any skeletons he might have in his closet. Raven didn't ask unnecessary questions. "I'll get started," she said simply. By the time her report arrived 2 days later, I was ready for the worst. What I read, however, surpassed even my expectations. Travis Reed wasn't just a philanderer. He was a fraud. Raven had uncovered a string of dubious business ventures, misappropriated funds, false partnerships, and ongoing lawsuits that painted a damning picture. One detail in particular stopped me cold. Chloe and Travis had been spending weekends together at my hill country property, a place I had bought for our anniversaries, a place where we had celebrated milestones and forged memories. It was no longer just betrayal. It was desecration. When Chloe returned home that evening, I studied her carefully. She moved around the house with the same ease and confidence she had always displayed, utterly unaware that I had unraveled the lies she had so carefully spun. "Dinner's in the oven," she said, smiling as though everything was perfectly ordinary. I nodded, forcing a smile of my own. "Thanks. You're a lifesaver." She tilted her head, sensing something in my tone. "Everything okay? Just a long day?" I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Let's eat." Later that night, I sat alone in my study, surrounded by the evidence I had gathered. The photos, the messages, the financial records. All of it formed a narrative that Chloe could no longer escape. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Confrontation would be too easy, too impulsive. I needed to ensure that when the moment came, it would be absolute. I began to sketch out my plan, each step precise and deliberate. The upcoming family dinner party was the perfect stage. Our closest friends and colleagues would be there, witnesses to the truth. Chloe had created this deception in silence. I would expose it in the light, and as I closed my notebook, a sense of calm settled over me. The life Chloe had tried to build with Travis would crumble, just as she had tried to dismantle the one we had built together. The decision to hold the family dinner party was, in itself, an act of irony. For years, this annual event had been a cornerstone of the life Chloe and I had built together, a gathering of friends, family, and colleagues, all eager to bask in what they believed was our perfect marriage. It was always Chloe's domain, the highlight of her social calendar. This year, however, it would serve a far darker purpose. I leaned against the kitchen counter one morning, watching her flit about with her usual energy, her phone in one hand and a planner in the other. "We need to lock down a date for the dinner," I said casually, sipping my coffee. Chloe paused, her eyes flicking to me with faint surprise. "I wasn't sure you'd want to do it this year. You seemed distracted." I shrugged, keeping my tone neutral. "It's tradition, isn't it? And besides, everyone's been asking. I figure we can pull it off. You're the real mastermind behind these things, after all." Her smile brightened at the compliment, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Chloe loved nothing more than being at the center of a carefully curated event, orchestrating every detail to perfection. "Well, if you're sure," she said, already flipping through her planner. "I'll make a few calls and start setting things up. It's a bit late to get some of the caterers, but I'm sure I can make it work." "Good," I said, setting my cup down and meeting her gaze. "I trust you to make it memorable." She didn't catch the double meaning in my words, too caught up in the logistics of guest lists and menus. I felt a cold satisfaction as I watched her dive into the task with enthusiasm, utterly unaware of the trap she was helping me set. Later that day, I sat in my study, staring at the neatly organized folders spread across my desk. Each one was a piece of the puzzle: financial records, screenshots of messages, and photographs. I had everything I needed to expose Chloe and Travis, but I wasn't done yet. It was time to take the next step. I picked up my phone and dialed Jade's number. Jade and I had crossed paths years ago when she covered a major tech scandal involving a competitor. She was sharp, relentless, and most importantly, she knew how to keep a source anonymous. "Hunter," she said when she answered, her voice calm but curious. "It's been a while. What can I do for you?" "I've got a story for you," I replied, keeping my tone measured. "It involves Travis Reed, investment banker, or at least that's what he calls himself." There was a brief pause, and I could almost hear her interest sharpening on the other end of the line. "I've heard the name. What are we talking about here?" "Financial misconduct. Fraud. Multiple victims, potentially millions involved," I said, laying out the barest details. "I've got evidence, documents, records, everything you'll need to dig into it." "Why come to me?" she asked, her tone cautious but intrigued. "You could go straight to the authorities." "I need someone who can handle this with care," I said. "Someone who can expose the truth without dragging me into the spotlight." "Can you do that?" "Send me what you have," Jade said, her voice steady. "If it checks out, I'll start digging." "Good," I replied. "You'll have it by the end of the day." As I gathered the files for Jade, my phone buzzed with a message from Raven. She had been working tirelessly to uncover every layer of Travis's life, and her updates were always precise and thorough. "Got something. Chloe isn't just aware of Travis's schemes. She's actively involved. Found emails and receipts linking her to one of his dummy corporations. Sending everything now." I stared at the screen, the weight of her words sinking in. Chloe wasn't just complicit in the affair. She had tied herself to Travis's financial crimes, making her not just a cheater, but an accomplice. A sharp anger surged through me, but I forced myself to remain calm. This revelation wasn't just another piece of evidence, it was leverage. That evening, as Chloe and I sat down to dinner, I studied her carefully. She chatted about the dinner party plans, her tone light and cheerful. I nodded along, asking just enough questions to keep her engaged, but my thoughts were elsewhere. "Do you think we should invite Travis?" she asked suddenly, her tone casual. The audacity of the question nearly made me choke on my wine. I set my glass down carefully, meeting her gaze. "Travis?" "Yes," she said, as though the name carried no weight. "He's been such a help with the foundation. I think it might be nice to include him." I considered my response carefully, forcing my expression to remain neutral. "If you think he should be there, invite him. You're the expert on these things." Her smile widened, and she seemed pleased by my apparent indifference. I felt a chill run through me as I realized how deeply she underestimated me. That night, I finalized my plans. Chloe and Travis thought they were safe, that their secrets were untouchable. But at the dinner party, under the glow of candlelight and the gaze of our friends and colleagues, I would shatter their illusions. There's something surreal about playing the role of a gracious host when every nerve in your body is coiled with tension. As I stood in the foyer of my home, greeting our guests with smiles and handshakes, it struck me how much life is like theater. Everyone wears a mask, and tonight mine was flawless. The dining room glowed with soft, golden light. Chloe had outdone herself once again. The table was a masterpiece of elegance. Pristine white linens, crystal glasses that caught the flicker of candlelight, and a centerpiece of fresh blooms in deep reds and golds. The air was filled with the mingling scents of roasted lamb, garlic, and herbs, mingling with the faint hum of classical music. It was, by all appearances, a perfect setting for a perfect evening. Guests began to arrive in waves, filling the house with laughter and lively conversation. My friends from the tech world exchanged banter with Chloe's acquaintances from the foundation, their voices overlapping in a comfortable din. I moved through the crowd, offering warm greetings and refilling glasses, every move calculated to maintain the illusion. Chloe, radiant in a burgundy dress that accentuated her effortless grace, was in her element. She flitted from group to group, laughing, touching arms, her charm on full display. Watching her, you'd never suspect the deceit that lay beneath. It was almost admirable how seamlessly she wore the mask. But tonight, I was the one in control, even if she didn't realize it yet. The doorbell rang, and I knew, without looking, who it would be. Chloe excused herself to answer it, her tone as bright as ever. "Travis, you made it," I heard her exclaim. "Cool mean. Let me introduce you around." I turned just in time to see her leading him into the living room, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Travis was exactly as I remembered him from the photos, polished, confident, with the kind of smirk that made me want to punch him. He was dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit, the picture of charm. As they approached, I plastered on my best smile and extended a hand. "Travis, welcome," I said, gripping his hand firmly. My eyes locked with his, unblinking, and I held the handshake a beat too long. "Chloe's told me a lot about you." Travis's smirk faltered just slightly. "Likewise," he said, his voice smooth but wary. He glanced at Chloe, who gave him a reassuring smile, oblivious to the undercurrent. "Well," I said, releasing his hand, "make yourself comfortable. We've got plenty of wine, and dinner will be served shortly." As the evening wore on, I made it a point to keep Travis in my sights. He was smooth, I'd give him that. He charmed the other guests with ease, his laughter ringing out as though he hadn't a care in the world. Chloe stayed close to him, the two of them careful not to linger too long in each other's orbit, but always within arm's reach. I waited until dinner was served to make my move. The table stretched before us, a tableau of food and fine company, but my focus was razor-sharp. Seated at the head of the table, I had the perfect vantage point. Chloe was to my right, Travis further down, his posture relaxed, as though he truly believed he had fooled everyone. The conversation ebbed and flowed as the first course was served, a chilled cucumber soup garnished with dill. I made polite small talk, allowing the tension to simmer beneath the surface. When the main course arrived, perfectly cooked lamb with roasted vegetables, I seized my moment. "So, Travis," I began, my tone casual, as though I were genuinely interested, "Chloe tells me you've been doing some incredible work at the foundation." Travis looked up, a fork halfway to his mouth. "Oh, well, I try," he said with a modest shrug. "It's all about helping the community, right?" "Absolutely," I said, nodding. "But I imagine your real work keeps you busy." "Investment banking, was it?" His smile froze for the briefest of moments before he recovered. "That's right. It's a challenging field, but rewarding. Always something new to tackle." "I can imagine," I said, swirling the wine in my glass. "And I hear you've been spending some time in the hill country. Beautiful place, isn't it?" Travis's hand tightened on his fork, and I saw the faintest flicker of unease cross his face. "It is," he said carefully. "I've taken a few trips out there recently. Good for clearing the head." "Clearing the head," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Yes, I've always found it to be a very intimate kind of retreat." Chloe shifted beside me, her hand twitching against the tablecloth. I didn't look at her, keeping my attention squarely on Travis. The rest of the table was oblivious, their conversations continuing around us, but the three of us were locked in a silent battle. "Tell me," I pressed, leaning forward slightly, "do you have a favorite spot out there? I've been meaning to explore more." Travis opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly struggling to find an answer. Chloe jumped in, her voice too bright, too quick. "Hunter, don't interrogate the poor man," she said with a forced laugh. "I'm sure he'd rather enjoy his dinner than talk about real estate." I turned to her, meeting her gaze for the first time that evening. Her smile was brittle, her eyes darting to Travis as though willing him to stay calm. I offered her a slow, deliberate smile in return. "Of course," I said smoothly. Wouldn't want to ruin anyone's appetite. The rest of the meal passed in a haze of tension and polite conversation. Travis avoided meeting my eyes, and Chloe's laughter grew increasingly strained. I took my time, savoring every moment, every flicker of discomfort on their faces. As dessert was served, a decadent chocolate souffle, I leaned back in my chair, feeling the first stirrings of satisfaction. The trap was closing, and they had no idea. I had always known that moments like these required precision. You could not rush, nor could you falter. Timing was everything, and tonight I intended to be perfect. The conversation around the table was lively, filled with the kind of easy chatter that comes from good food, fine wine, and the comfort of familiar company. Chloe sat beside me, her face aglow with the warm light of the candles, her smile charming and unassuming. Across from her, Travis was in his element, laughing at some joke one of my friends had made. I sat back in my chair, my glass of wine cradled loosely in my hand, and let the moment stretch. This was the calm before the storm, the last few precious seconds before everything they thought they knew came crashing down. I cleared my throat and rose to my feet, glass in hand. The room quieted almost immediately, all eyes turning to me. Chloe looked up with a smile, her expression one of pleasant curiosity. If I could have everyone's attention, I began, my voice steady and even, I'd like to say a few words. The silence was absolute now, the kind of hush that only comes when people sense that something important is about to happen. First, let me thank you all for being here tonight, I said, sweeping my gaze over the table. It's always a pleasure to gather with the people who matter most, to celebrate the bonds of family, friendship, and loyalty. There was a murmur of agreement, a few nods, and raised glasses. But sometimes, I continued, letting my tone shift ever so slightly. Those bonds are tested. Betrayal isn't always a sharp and sudden blow. Sometimes it comes slowly, creeping in, eroding trust in the quietest of ways. The room had grown still, the kind of stillness that makes the air feel heavy. Chloe shifted beside me, her smile faltering. I could feel her eyes on me, searching my face for some hint of where this was going. And tonight, I said, raising my glass slightly, we lay bare the truth. With those words, I set my glass down on the table and gestured toward the far wall. The guests turned as the projector screen behind me flickered to life, and the first image appeared. It was a photo of Chloe and Travis, taken in the living room of my hill country property. They were standing close, her hand resting on his chest, their smiles intimate. The room erupted into gasps and murmurs, the kind of shocked reactions that ripple through a crowd like wildfire. What is this? Chloe's voice broke the silence, sharp and trembling. I ignored her, stepping to the side as the next image appeared, a screenshot of one of their text exchanges. Can't wait to see you this weekend. I'll bring the wine if you bring the excuses. Travis's voice cut through the noise, defensive and panicked. This isn't what it looks like, isn't it? I asked, turning to face him. My voice was calm, my expression impassive, but my words landed with the weight of a sledgehammer. Because to me, it looks like you've been spending time with my wife. It looks like you've been using my property for your little rendezvous. Am I mistaken? Travis stammered, his face pale, but before he could form a coherent response, I crossed the room to the sideboard where the first course had been served. There was a bowl of tomato soup still warm. I picked it up, the weight of it solid in my hands, and turned back to Travis. He was frozen, his eyes wide as he watched me approach. I didn't say a word. I simply tilted the bowl and let the soup pour over his head. The effect was instantaneous. The rich, red liquid cascaded down his face, dripping onto his pristine suit and pooling on the floor beneath him. He gasped, jerking back in shock, and the room exploded into chaos. Welcome to the family, dumbass, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade. I set the empty bowl on the table with deliberate care and returned to my seat, unhurried and composed. Around me, the room was a whirlwind of motion and sound. Guests were on their feet, their voices raised in disbelief and confusion. Chloe sat frozen beside me, her face ashen, her lips trembling as though she couldn't decide whether to speak or stay silent. Travis stumbled back from the table, his hands fumbling at his suit in a futile attempt to wipe away the mess. His composure, so carefully crafted, had crumbled completely. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he shouted, his voice cracking with anger and humiliation. "What's wrong with me?" I echoed, turning my gaze on him. "What's wrong with me, Travis, is you. You thought you could walk into my life, take what's mine, and get away with it? Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I wouldn't find out?" "Hunter, please," Chloe began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. I turned to her, my voice low and cold. "Don't you dare try to explain this away. Don't insult me with excuses." Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no pity. The room was beginning to empty now, guests awkwardly excusing themselves, their expressions a mix of shock and discomfort. I didn't care. Let them leave. Let them talk. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch as the last of the guests trickled out. Chloe sat beside me, trembling, while Travis stood by the door, soup-stained and broken. "I think we're done here," I said finally, rising to my feet. "Chloe, we'll talk later. As for you," I added, turning to Travis, "get out of my house. Now!" He didn't argue. He simply nodded, his shoulders slumped, and stumbled out the door. The house had grown silent, save for the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. The echoes of the chaos, gasps, muttered apologies, hasty goodbyes, were still settling in the air like dust after an explosion. I stood at the dining table, my fingers lightly grazing the smooth wood, surveying the wreckage of the evening. Chloe sat where she had been all night, still and pale, her hands clutching the edge of her chair as though it might anchor her to reality. Her gaze was fixed downward, refusing to meet mine, her perfectly composed mask shattered. "Do you have anything to say?" I asked, my voice sharp enough to cut through the suffocating stillness. She flinched but remained silent. "Nothing," I pressed, stepping closer. "Not a single word, Chloe? After all of this?" Finally, she looked up at me. Her eyes were rimmed with red, tears pooling but refusing to fall. "I made a mistake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "A mistake?" I repeated, incredulous. "A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday or buying the wrong brand of coffee. What you've done, what you've been doing, isn't a mistake. It's a series of deliberate choices." Her lower lip quivered, and the tears began to spill, trailing down her cheeks. "Hunter, please," she began, her voice breaking. "I never meant for it to get this far. I didn't know how to stop. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me?" I laughed bitterly, the sound hollow and sharp. "You didn't want to hurt me, yet you brought him into our home. You used my property to carry on your little affair. Do you even hear yourself?" She shook her head, her hands gripping the chair, so tightly her knuckles turned white. "It wasn't like that, oh, wasn't it?" I interrupted, my voice rising. I leaned forward, my palms flat on the table. "Tell me, Chloe, what was it like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've not only betrayed me, but made a mockery of everything we've built together. Or did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you think I was too blind, too trusting, to see what was right in front of me?" "I was lost," she said, her voice barely audible. "I felt invisible. You were always so busy with work, and I snapped, straightening. "Don't you dare try to blame this on me. Don't you dare reduce this to some sob story about feeling neglected. If you felt invisible, you could have spoken to me. You could have told me how you felt. But instead, you chose this. You chose him." She broke then, her face crumpling as a sob tore from her throat. "I'm sorry," she choked out, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry, Hunter. Please, just please forgive me." "Forgive you," I repeated, my voice cold and unyielding. "That's rich, Chloe. Did you seek forgiveness when you flaunted him in our home? When you desecrated what we built together?" Her sobs grew louder, her shoulders shaking as she tried to form words that wouldn't come. I stepped back, running a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of the anger and betrayal threatening to crush me. And then my phone buzzed. I pulled it from my pocket, my eyes flicking to the screen. A message from Raven. Hunter, you're going to want to see this. I opened the attachment, and my breath caught as the files loaded. Bank statements, emails, and transaction records. All of them tied to Chloe. Travis hadn't just been siphoning funds through his fraudulent schemes. He had been using Chloe as a cover, funneling money into an account under her name. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Whether she had known the full extent of it or not, Chloe was implicated. And this wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. This was a betrayal of everything I had built, my reputation, my legacy. What's wrong? Chloe's voice broke through my thoughts, shaky and filled with dread. I looked up at her, my expression unreadable. What's wrong? I echoed, stepping toward her. What's wrong, Chloe, is that you've done more than just cheat on me. You've tied yourself to Travis's crimes. Her face went blank, the blood draining from her cheeks. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, I said, holding up the phone so she could see the screen. These transactions, these accounts, they're in your name. Did you think I wouldn't find out? She shook her head violently, her voice rising in panic. No, that's not. I didn't know about any of this. I swear, Hunter, I didn't you? I asked, my tone deadly calm. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been a willing participant. It looks like you've been helping him cover his tracks. I didn't, she cried, her hands reaching for me, desperate. I didn't know what he was doing. I swear to you, Hunter, I had no idea. You have to believe me. I pulled back, her touch repelling me like a flame. Believe you? I said, my voice low and venomous. After everything you've done, you expect me to believe you? Her sobs filled the room, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no pity, only the cold, hard weight of betrayal. I turned away from her, my mind already spinning with the implications of what I'd learned. Travis might have been the architect of the scheme, but Chloe had given him the means to execute it. Whether she had done so knowingly or not, she had made herself complicit. Hunter, please, she begged, her voice raw and broken. Please don't do this. Don't destroy us. We can fix this. We can. There is no we, Chloe, I said, cutting her off. Not anymore. Her cries followed me as I walked out of the dining room, my heart heavy but resolute. This wasn't just about our marriage anymore. This was about justice, about protecting everything I had worked so hard to build. The front door slammed shut behind Travis with a force that made the walls reverberate. The sound was satisfying, a punctuation mark to the chaos I had orchestrated. I stood by the dining table, my hand resting on the back of the chair I'd abandoned moments earlier, letting the tension in my shoulders drain ever so slightly. The guests were leaving now, their murmurs of shock and disbelief filling the air as they gathered their coats and handbags. I offered nods to those who approached me, their expressions a mix of pity and awkwardness, the kind people reserve for witnessing a train wreck. Hunter, one of my colleagues said as he reached out to clasp my hand. His grip was firm but hesitant, his voice low enough that only I could hear. I don't know what to say. If you need anything, you call me. Thank you, I replied, my tone even. I appreciate that. Others followed, their words blurring into a stream of vague assurances and half-hearted apologies. No one dared to linger too long, unwilling to entangle themselves in the aftermath of the spectacle I'd unleashed. And who could blame them? They had come for lamb and soufflé, not betrayal laid bare. When the last guest finally stepped out into the night, the house was silent again. Silent except for Chloe. She sat in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch, her face streaked with tears and her hands twisting together in her lap. Her once perfect hair had fallen out of place, and the burgundy dress that had so captivated earlier now looked wrinkled and worn under the harsh light of the chandelier. I closed the front door quietly and walked into the room, my steps measured. I stopped a few feet from her, crossing my arms as I studied her. She didn't look up. What now, Chloe? I asked, my voice cold, cutting through the quiet. She flinched as though I'd struck her, her hands still wringing together. I don't know, she stammered, her voice hoarse. Hunter, please. I don't know what to say. Don't you? I countered, my tone sharp. Because I think now's the time to find something, don't you? She finally looked up at me, her eyes swollen, her face pale. It was never supposed to happen like this, she whispered. Supposed to happen? I repeated, stepping closer. You mean the affair? Or the humiliation you brought on yourself tonight? Her tears began anew, spilling down her cheeks as she shook her head. I wasn't thinking clearly. I didn't mean to hurt you. I swear, Hunter, I didn't. You didn't mean to? I interrupted, my voice rising slightly. Chloe, don't insult me. Every single choice you made was deliberate. You didn't trip and fall into his arms. You didn't accidentally use my property for your games. And you didn't accidentally tie yourself to his financial crimes. Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. Please, she sobbed. Please don't let this ruin me. You have to help me. I don't know what to do. I watched her for a moment, letting the weight of her pleas hang in the air before I spoke again. Ruin you? I asked, my tone sharp and laced with bitterness. Chloe, do you even understand what you've done? You tied yourself to Travis's crimes, his schemes. Do you realize the position you've put me in? Do you even care about the damage this could do to my career, my name? I didn't know, she cried, looking up at me with desperation. I didn't know what he was doing, Hunter. You have to believe me. I don't have to do anything, I said coldly. You made your choices, Chloe. Now you'll live with them. No, please, she begged, standing now, her hands reaching for me. You can fix this. You have the resources, the connections. You can make this go away. Please, Hunter, I'll do anything. I stepped back, her touch repelling me like a magnet reversed. Fix this? I said, my voice low but full of venom. You think I'd put myself on the line for you after everything you've done? You think I'd risk my reputation, my company, for the woman who lied to my face and betrayed me behind my back? Her shoulders slumped, and she fell back onto the couch, defeated. The conversation ended there, but the fallout continued. The next morning, the first blow landed. The expose Jade had been working on was published, detailing Travis's fraudulent activities in meticulous detail. The article was brutal, outlining years of shady dealings, falsified documents, and millions of dollars siphoned from unsuspecting clients. By midday, the SEC had announced an investigation, and Travis's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. His career, once shiny and impressive, was now a smoldering ruin. I watched the news unfold with a quiet sense of satisfaction. The wheels of justice were turning, and I hadn't even had to push them myself. Chloe spent the day in a fog, her phone buzzing with calls and texts she ignored. Her face was drawn and pale, and for once, she had nothing to say. By the time evening fell, she finally approached me again, her movements hesitant. Hunter, she began, her voice small. I looked up from my laptop, raising an eyebrow. Is there anything you can do? She asked, wringing her hands again. To make this stop? To protect me? I closed the laptop slowly and leaned back in my chair, meeting her gaze. I've already told you, Chloe, I said, my voice calm but firm. You made your choices. Now you'll live with them. She said nothing, her face crumpling as tears spilled down her cheeks again. This time, I didn't watch. I turned away, leaving her to face the weight of her decisions alone. The first steps are always the hardest. That's what they say, isn't it? Whether it's the first step onto a new path or the first stroke of a pen to sever old ties, the weight of beginning again feels insurmountable. But for me, those first steps were less about difficulty and more about resolve. I sat in my lawyer's office, the familiar smell of leather and faintly scented wood polish filling the air. Papers were spread across the desk before me, each one carefully drafted to ensure no loopholes, no concessions I hadn't explicitly agreed to. Hunter, my lawyer, Greg said, leaning forward, are you sure you want to go this route? You could leverage more of her involvement with Travis to push for a harsher settlement. No, I said, shaking my head. I don't want to drag this out longer than it needs to be. She'll get the bare minimum. No more, no less. Greg nodded, his pen tapping lightly against the edge of the desk. Fair enough. With the evidence you've provided, the judge isn't likely to grant her any sympathy. You've made your case airtight. That's the point, I replied, leaning back in my chair. My voice was calm, measured, but beneath it lay a simmering exhaustion. I was done with this chapter of my life. The anger had burned brightly enough, but now I just wanted to move on. The process was swift, all things considered. The courts didn't look favorably on Chloe's choices or her connection to Travis's crimes. The evidence Raven had uncovered made it clear that she had, at the very least, been complicit enough to raise suspicions. Combined with her betrayal of our marriage, the divorce settlement was decidedly one-sided. Chloe was awarded a modest allowance, enough to avoid complete destitution, but nowhere near the life she had grown accustomed to. The house, the assets, the company, everything else remained firmly in my control. She didn't fight me on it. Perhaps she knew better, or perhaps she simply didn't have the strength. In the weeks that followed, I found myself rediscovering the man I'd been before everything unraveled. My days were no longer consumed by the weight of anger and betrayal. Instead, I threw myself into projects that had long been on the back burner. The garage became my sanctuary. I rolled up my sleeves and dove into the restoration of an old '67 Mustang, a project I'd dreamed about for years but never seemed to find the time for. The scent of engine oil and the feel of grease under my fingernails were oddly therapeutic, grounding me in the present moment. Outside the garage, I began reconnecting with old friends. Lunches that had once been postponed indefinitely were now on the calendar, and evenings spent laughing over shared memories felt like a balm to my bruised soul. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. I was sitting at the kitchen counter one morning, sipping my coffee and scrolling through the news on my tablet, when a headline caught my eye: "Socialite Chloe Drake flees Austin amidst scandal." I read the article with a mixture of disbelief and inevitability. The piece detailed how Chloe had quietly left the city, her departure shrouded in speculation. Some claimed she'd gone to stay with distant relatives. Others suggested she'd left the country entirely. Whatever the truth, one thing was clear: her once flawless reputation was in tatters. The woman who had once commanded the admiration of Austin's social elite was now the subject of whispered gossip and public scrutiny. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, regret, perhaps, or pity, but it passed quickly, replaced by a quiet sense of vindication. Chloe had made her choices, and she was living with their consequences. Bye-bye.